Sienna God, hello all. Oshisahiya, good evening, and Wado. Thank you for watching. This is day 12, part A of reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an Inquiry into Values by Robert M. Persig. And man, I mean, I just got sucked in again and totally went over the 20-minute allotted time for Instagram. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick up where that video left off. And so for those of you who stuck through it when I actually realized that I had literally went over time, you're going to hear a few sentences over again. But anyway, all he had left was his one crazy lone dream of quality, a map of a route across the mountain for which he had sacrificed everything. Then after the electrodes were attached, he lost that. I will never know all that was in his head at the time, nor will anyone else. What's left now is just fragments, debris, scattered notes, which could be pieced together, but which leave huge areas unexplained. When I first discovered this debris, I felt like some agricultural peasant near the outskirts of, say, Athens, who occasionally and without much surprise plows up stones that have strange designs on them. I knew that these were part of some larger overall design that had existed in the past, but it was far beyond my comprehension. At first, I deliberately avoided them, paid no attention to them, because I knew these stones had caused some kind of trouble I should avoid. But I could see, even then, that they were a part of a huge structure of thought, and I was curious about it in a secret sort of way. Later, when I developed more confidence in my immunity to his affliction, I became interested in this debris in a more positive way and began to jot down the fragments amorphically, that is, without regard to form, in the order in which they occurred to me. Many of these amorphic statements have been supplied by friends. There are thousands of them now, and although only a small portion of them can fit into the Chautauqua, this Chautauqua is clearly based on them. It is probably a long way from what he thought. When trying to recreate a whole pattern by deduction from fragments, I am bound to commit errors and put down inconsistencies, for which I must ask some indulgence. In many cases, the fragments are ambiguous. A number of different conclusions could be drawn. If something is wrong, there's a good chance that the error isn't in what he thought, but in my reconstruction of it. And a better reconstruction can later be found. A whir sounds and a partridge disappears through the trees. Did you see it? Says Chris. Yes, I say back. What was it? A partridge. How do you know? They rock back and forth like that when they fly. I say, I'm not sure of this, but it sounds right. They stay close to the ground too. Oh, says Chris. And we continue hiking. The rays of the sun create a cathedral effect through the pines. Today, now I want to take up the first phase of his journey into quality, the non-metaphysical phase, and this will be pleasant. It's nice to start journeys pleasantly, even when you know they won't end that way. Using his class notes as reference material, I want to construct the way in which quality became a working concept for him in the teaching of rhetoric. His second phase, the metaphysical one, was tenuous and speculative, but this first phase, in which he simply taught rhetoric, was by all accounts solid and pragmatic, and probably deserves to be judged on its own merits independently of the second phase. He'd been innovating extensively. He'd been having trouble with students who had nothing to say. At first he thought it was laziness, but later it became apparent that it wasn't. They just couldn't think of anything to say. One of them, a girl with strong lens glasses, wanted to write a 500-word essay about the United States. He was used to the sinking feeling that comes from statements like this and suggested without disparagement that she narrow it down to just Bozeman. When the paper came due, she didn't have it and was quite upset. She had tried and tried, but she just couldn't think of anything to say. He had already discussed her with her previous instructors, and they'd confirmed his impressions of her. She was very serious, disciplined, and hardworking, but extremely dull. Not a spark of creativity in her anywhere. Her eyes behind the thick lensed glasses were the eyes of a drudge. She wasn't bluffing him. She really couldn't think of anything to say and was upset by her inability to do as she was told. It just stumped him. Now he couldn't think of anything to say. A silence occurred, and then a peculiar answer. Narrow it down to the main street of Bozeman. It was a stroke of insight. She nodded dutifully and went out, but just before her next class, she came back in real distress, tears this time, distress that had obviously been there for a long time. She still couldn't think of anything to say and couldn't understand why. If she couldn't think of anything about all of Bozeman, she should be able to think of something about just one street. He was furious. "You're not looking," he said. A memory came back of his own dismissal from the university for having too much to say. For every fact, there is an infinity of hypotheses. The more you look, the more you see. She really wasn't looking and yet somehow didn't understand this. He told her angrily, "Narrow it down to the front of one building on the main street of Bozeman. The Opera House. Start with the upper left-hand brick." Her eyes behind the thick lens glasses opened wide. She came in the next class with a puzzled look and handed him a 5,000-word essay on the front of the Opera House on the main street of Bozeman, Montana. "I sat in the hamburger stand across the street," she said, "and started writing about the first brick and the second brick, and then by the third brick it all started to come and I couldn't stop. They thought I was crazy and they kept kidding me. But here it all is. I don't understand it." Neither did he, but on long walks through the streets of the town, he thought about it and concluded she was evidently stopped with the same kind of blockage that had paralyzed him on his first day of teaching. She was blocked because she was trying to repeat in her writing things she had already heard, just as on the first day he tried to repeat things he had already decided to say. She couldn't think of anything to write about Bozeman because she couldn't recall anything she had heard worth repeating. She was strangely unaware that she could look and see freshly for herself as she wrote without primary regard. Oh my God, I thought I skipped a sentence. For what had been said before, the narrowing down to one brick destroyed the blockage because it was so obvious she had to do some original and direct seeing. He experimented further. In one class, he had everyone write all hour about the back of his thumb. Oh my gosh. Everyone gave him funny looks at the beginning of the hour, but everyone did it. And there wasn't a single complaint about nothing to say. In another class, he changed the subject from the thumb to a coin and got a full hour's write-in from every student. In other classes, it was the same. Some asked, "Do you have to write about both sides?" Once they got into the idea of seeing directly for themselves, they also saw there was no limit to the amount they could say. It was a confidence-building assignment too, because what they wrote, even though seemingly trivial, was nevertheless their own thing, not a mimicking of someone else's. Classes where he used that coin exercise were always less bulky and more interested. As a result of his experiments, he concluded that imitation was a real evil that had to be broken before real rhetoric teaching could begin. This imitation seemed to be an external compulsion. Little children didn't have it. It seemed to come later on, possibly as a result of school itself. That sounded right. And the more he thought about it, the more right it sounded. Schools teach you to imitate. That's true. If you don't imitate what the teacher wants you, you get a bad grade. Here in college, it was more sophisticated, of course. You were supposed to imitate the teacher in such a way as to convince the teacher you were not imitating, but taking the essence of the instruction and going ahead with it on your own. That got you A's. Originality, on the other hand, can get you anything from A to F. The whole grading system cautioned against it. He discussed this with a professor of psychology who lived next door to him, an extremely imaginative teacher who said, "Right, eliminate the whole degree and grading system and then you'll get real education." Absolutely. They want parrots. What's crazy is that like you're paying all this money for just, it's like a camaraderie, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, some big name that you can throw around, not an actual true education. It's what can you copy paste without copying and pasting, because then you'll be hit with plagiarism and all kinds of stuff, right? So it's almost kind of like a flattery, I don't know, ego stroking of the professor or some, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like it's just like really weird to even articulate because it's so stupid, right? Anyway, you can get the same like actual education when you cut it down to the meat and bones. You can literally get it anywhere. You can get it at the community college. You can get it like anywhere, right? Without like the ego stroking and then being forced to take classes that you're never going to even use in your degree and all that. And all of those cost thousands of dollars and all this, you know, and then the books and everything that you're never going to use again and all of that. It's just a whole stinking thing. It's a scam. Anyway, Phaedrus thought about this, and when weeks later a very bright student couldn't think of a subject for a term paper, it was still on his mind, so he gave it to her as a topic. She didn't like the topic at first, but agreed to take it anyway. Within a week, she was talking about it to everyone, and within 2 weeks had worked up a superb paper. The class she delivered it to didn't have the advantage of 2 weeks to think about the subject, however, and was quite hostile to the whole idea of eliminating grades and degrees. This didn't slow her down at all. Her tone took on an old-time religious fervor. She begged the other students to listen to understand this was really right. "I'm not saying this for him," she said and glanced at Phaedrus. "It's for you." Her pleading tone of religious fervor greatly impressed him, along with the fact that her college entrance examinations had placed her in the upper 1% of the class. During the next quarter, when teaching persuasive writing, he chose this topic as a demonstrator, a piece of persuasive writing he worked up by himself. Okay, it was missing a couple letters there. Day by day, in front of and with the help of the class. He used the demonstrator to avoid talking in terms of principles of composition, all of which he had deep doubts about. He felt that by exposing classes to his own sentences as he made them, with all the misgivings and hang-ups and erasures, he would give a more honest picture of what writing was like by spending class time picking nits and completed student work or holding up the completed work of masters for emulation. This time he developed an argument that the whole grading system and degree should be eliminated. And to make it something that truly involved the students in what they were hearing, he withheld all grades during the quarter. Just up above the top of the ridge, the snow can be seen now. On foot, it's many days away though. The rocks below it are too steep for a direct hiking climb, particularly with the heavy loads we're carrying. And Chris is way too young for any kind of ropes and... Oh... Is it pitons? Pitons? I can't remember how to pronounce that. Pitons. It's those things that you put in between the rocks, right? I think. Anyway, we must cross over the forested ridge we are now approaching, enter another canyon, follow it to its end, and then come back at the upward angle along to the ridge. 3 days hard to the snow. What? 3 days hard to the snow. Oh, yeah, it'll take them 3 days to get there. 4 days easy. If we don't show up in 9, Deweese will start looking for us. We stop for a rest, sit down and brace against a tree so that we don't topple over backward from the packs. Yeah, right? After a while, I reach around over my shoulder, take the machete from the top of my pack, and hand it to Chris. Yeah, it's really hard when you have a full pack. You gotta kind of like roll over and awkwardly, and it like pushes you forward to the ground, and you gotta awkwardly get up. Anyway, this whole thing. See those 2 aspens over there, the straight ones at the edge? I point to them. Cut those down about a foot from the ground. Why? We'll need them later for hiking sticks and tent poles. Chris takes the machete, starts to rise, but then settles back again. You cut them, he says. So I take the machete and go over and cut the poles. They both cut neatly in one swing, except for the final strip of bark, which I sever with the back hook of the machete. Up in the rocks, you need the poles for balancing, and the pine up above is no good for poles. And this is about the last of the aspen here. It bothers me a little, though, that Chris is turning down work. Not a good sign in the mountains. A short rest, and then on we go. It'll take a while to get used to this load. I was thinking, yeah, that's kind of weird that he's just like, you do it, right? There's a negative reaction to all the weight. As we go on, though, it'll become more natural. Phaedrus' argument for the abolition of the degree and grading system produced a nonplussed or negative reaction in all but a few students at first, since it seemed on first judgment to destroy the whole university system. One student laid it wide open when she said, with complete candor, "Of course, you can't eliminate the degree and grading system. After all, that's what we're here for." She spoke the complete truth. The idea that the majority of the students attend a university for an education independent of the degree and grades is a little hypocrisy. Everyone is happier not to expose. Occasionally, some students do arrive for an education, but is it rote? R-O-T-E, and the mechanical nature of the institution soon converts them to a less idealistic attitude. The demonstrator was an argument that elimination of grades and degrees would destroy this hypocrisy. Rather than deal with the generalities, it dealt with the specific career of an imaginary student who more or less typified what was found in the classroom, a student completely conditioned to work for a grade rather than for the knowledge the grade was supposed to represent. Exactly. Missing it entirely. Such a student, the demonstrator hypothesized, would go to his first class, get his first assignment, and probably do it out of habit. He might go to the second and third as well, but eventually the novelty of the course would wear off, and because his academic life was not his only life, the pressure of other obligations or desires would create circumstances where he just would not be able to get an assignment in. Since there was no degree or grading system, he would incur no penalty for this. Subsequent lectures, which presumed he'd completed the assignment, might be a little more difficult to understand, however, and this difficulty in turn might weaken his interest to a point where the next assignment, which he would find quite hard, would also be dropped. Again, no penalty. That's true. In time, his weaker and weaker understanding of what the lectures were about would make it more and more difficult for him to pay attention in class. Eventually, he would see he wasn't learning much, and facing the continual pressure of outside obligations, he would stop studying, feel guilty about this, and stop attending class. Again, no penalty would be attached. But what had happened, the student with no hard feelings on anybody's part would have flunked himself out. Good. This is what should have happened. He wasn't there for a real education in the first place and had no real business there at all. A large amount of money and effort had been saved, and there would be no stigma or failure and ruin to haunt him the rest of his life. No bridges had been burned. I mean, I guess it would be a way to weed out the people who are truly there for an education. The student's biggest problem was a slave mentality, which had been built into him by years of carrot and whip grading. A mule mentality, which said, if you don't whip me, I won't work. He didn't get whipped, he didn't work. And the cart of civilization, which he supposedly was being trained to pull, was just going to have to creak along a little slower without him. This is a tragedy, however, only if you presume the cart of civilization, the system, is pulled by mules. This is a common vocational location point of view, but it's not the church attitude. The church attitude is that civilization or the system or society or whatever you want to call it is best served not by mules but by free men. The purpose of abolishing grades and degrees is not to punish mules or to get rid of them, but to provide an environment in which that mule can turn into a free man. The hypothetical student, still a mule, would drift around for a while. He would get another kind of education, quite as valuable as the one he'd abandoned, in what used to be called the School of Hard Knocks. Instead of wasting money and time as a high-status mule, he would now have to get a job as a low-status mule, maybe as a mechanic. Actually, his real status would go up. He would be making a contribution for a change. Maybe that's what he would do for the rest of his life. Maybe he'd found his level, but don't count on it. In time, 6 months, 5 years perhaps, a change could easily begin to take place. He'd become less and less satisfied with the kind of dumb, day-to-day shop work. His creative intelligence, stifled by too much theory and too many grades in college, would now become reawakened by the boredom of the shop. Thousands of hours of frustrating mechanical problems would have made him more interested in machine design. He would like to design machinery himself. He'd think he could do a better job. He would try modifying a few engines, meet with success, look for more success, but feel blocked because he didn't have the theoretical information. He would discover that before he felt stupid because of his lack of interest in theoretical information, he'd now find a brand of theoretical information which he'd have a lot of respect for, namely mechanical engineering. So he would come back to our degreeless and gradeless school, but with a difference. He'd no longer be a grade-motivated person. He'd be a knowledge-motivated person. He would need no external pushing to learn. His push would come from inside. It's important. He'd be a free man. He wouldn't need a lot of discipline to shape him up. In fact, if the instructors assigned him with slacking on the job, he would be likely to shape them up by asking rude questions. He'd be there to learn something, would be paying to learn something, and they'd better come up with it. Oh, well, that's true, right? hey, this is my dime, right? You're on my dime here. Anyway, done to go hang a good chance, we meet again. Love you, mean it.